Lightning flashed across the sky of Neoprog as Captain Elias Vex slammed his fist against the glowing control panel. The stolen chrono core hummed to life, its jagged blue energy ripping a hole through the fabric of time. Behind him, the clatter of Dominion enforcers' boots echoed through the rain-slick alley. "Jump ready in 10, shouted Kira, her fingers dancing over the stolen data pad, its screen flickering with warnings. Elias didn't look back at the bodies they'd left behind, the first casualties in a war no one had seen coming. "We don't know where it'll take us," muttered the scientist, his hands shaking as the device's countdown pulsed louder. Elias grinned, blood dripping from his brow. "Anywhere's better than here." The world shattered into fragments of light as the Dominion's shock troopers rounded the corner, weapons raised, just as the rebels vanished into the screaming vortex of time. The solar storm painted the sky in jagged ribbons of violet and gold over Dominion headquarters, perfect cover for the impossible. Elias adjusted the stolen security badge on his wrist, its forged signal flickering under the storm's electromagnetic pulse. "Systems are scrambled, but not for long," Kira muttered through the comms, her voice tight as her fingers flew over the holodisplay. The air smelled of ozone and impending rain. Inside, Dominion guards patrolled in synchronized formation, unaware of the shadows slipping through the maintenance ducts. Then, motion sensors flared. A klaxon wailed. Elias cursed as the first plasma round seared past him, melting the steel wall behind into molten slag. The rebels returned fire, their stolen weapons spitting white-hot defiance. Smoke filled the corridor, thick with the acrid tang of scorched metal. Left flank now. Elias barked and the team surged forward, boots pounding against the vibrating floor as the facility's defenses roared to life. Somewhere deep in the complex, containment fields failed, triggering secondary explosions that shook the ground like an earthquake. Then he saw it, the chrono device suspended in a shimmering containment field, its core pulsing with stolen time. Elias lunged, fingers grazing the housing just as the ceiling above him ruptured in a hail of debris. Alarms screamed like wounded animals. "Kira, got it." She shouted back, slicing through the last firewall with a snarl. The containment field flickered, died. Elias wrenched the device free, its weight humming against his palm like a live thing. A voice crackled over the Dominion's open channel. "All units, intruders in Sector 7. Lethal force authorized." Elias didn't hesitate. "We're out of time, move." The world erupted behind them as they ran. The ship groaned like a living thing as the temporal vortex swallowed them whole. Gravity twisted, flung them sideways. Elias's stomach lurched as the world dissolved into streaks of fractured light. Alarms shrieked in discordant harmony with Kira's swearing. "Stabilizers failing," she shouted, wrenched forward against her harness as the control panel spat sparks. Outside the viewscreen, time itself unraveled. Cities rose and crumbled in seconds, wars flickered like candle flames, and the sky burned with the birth and death of stars. The engineer's fingers blurred across the console, fighting to reroute power as the chrono core throbbed like a dying heart. "We're tearing apart." A jolt sudden as a gunshot, and the ship plummeted through a membrane of screaming light. Impact, metal screeched. Elias tasted blood. The wreckage settled in eerie silence, smoke curling through the cracked cockpit glass. Beyond it stretched a landscape of jagged obsidian spires under a bruised purple sky. Kira groaned, peeling herself from the controls. Temporal coordinates scrambled. "We're not in Neoprog anymore." A shadow moved outside, too fast, too fluid. Then another. Shapes flickered between the spires, their outlines warping like heat haze. The Dominion's warships were gone, but something worse was watching. Elias reached for his sidearm, heart hammering. "Welcome to the first jump," he muttered. "Now let's hope we live long enough to regret it." The air hung thick with the scent of rust and petrochemicals, old-world pollution, untouched by the Dominion's sterile terraforming. Elias coughed, his boots sinking into the damp earth as he staggered from the wreckage. The ship's hull hissed, its once gleaming metal now pitted and scorched, half buried in the mud of what looked like a derelict industrial yard. Kira was already on her knees beside the ruptured power core, her gloves slick with coolant as she pried open the access panel. Temporal feedback fried the regulators. She spat, tossing a cracked crystal matrix onto the ground. "We're not jumping again without a full rebuild." Jax kicked a dented fuel canister, sending it clattering into the shadows. "Sitting ducks," he muttered, glancing at the skyline smokestacks and crumbling ferrocrete, the skeletal remains of a city that hadn't yet learned to fear the Dominion's emblem. "You know what happens if we cough wrong in this timeline: paradoxes, temporal enforcers, or just plain old locals putting bullets in us for looting their scrap." A low whine cut through the gloom as the ship's last functional drone emerged, its scanners flickering over the debris. "Preliminary analysis," it chimed. "Local year is 2135. Dominion founding charter ratified in 2204. Recommend avoiding major population centers to minimize contamination risk." Elias rubbed his temples. 69 years before the first black and gold flags would rise over the assembly halls. 69 years to fix the core, avoid altering history, and somehow get home, if home still existed by then. A sound broke his thoughts, the crunch of gravel underfoot, not from the crew. Kira stiffened, her hand drifting to her hip. "We've got company." From the rusted gate, a figure stepped into the amber glow of a dying street lamp, a woman in a patched-up hazard suit, her rifle slung low but ready. "You folks lost," she called, her voice rough with the kind of exhaustion that came from living through the wrong end of history. Elias exchanged a glance with Jax. Lying would be safer, but the woman's eyes were sharp, her stance too steady for a mere scavenger. "The truth, then, or just enough of it, something like that," Elias said, stepping forward. "And we could use a mechanic." The woman's laugh was a dry, brittle thing. "Funny, we could use a miracle." Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. The past wasn't just watching anymore, it was closing in. The woman with the rifle didn't lower it, but her grip loosened just enough to be noticed. "Mechanics easy," she said, jerking her chin toward the wreckage. "What's harder is explaining why your ship smells like a gutted chronocore." Elias froze. Nobody outside the Dominion's inner circle should have recognized that signature ozone burn, unless they'd been closer to time tech than any scavenger had a right to be. Kira stepped forward, her posture casual, but her fingers twitched near her own weapon. "You've got a keen nose for someone living in a junkyard," the woman smirked. "Dr. Lien Maro, formerly of the Dominion's Temporal Research Division, until I realized their stable timelines involved erasing entire cities." She finally slung her rifle over her shoulder, revealing hands stained with chemical burns and old scars. "And you, let me guess, failed jump, fried core, and no idea how badly you've cracked the timeline just by landing here." Jax let out a low whistle. "We just met and I already like her." Lien ignored him, crouching to sift through the debris. She plucked a twisted piece of alloy from the mud, holding it up to the sickly light. The metal shimmered with residual temporal energy, its surface crawling with hairline fractures. "See these? Every jump leaves scars. The Dominion's got sensors fine-tuned to pick up the ripples." She tossed the fragment down, her voice dropping. "And you're not just leaving ripples, you're making tidal waves." Elias felt the hairs on his neck rise. "How long do we have before they pinpoint you?" Lien shrugged. "Depends. You've been jumping blind or using coordinates." Kira and Elias exchanged a glance. "Mostly blind," Kira admitted. Lien closed her eyes, exhaling through her nose. "Then congratulations, you've turned time itself into a shotgun blast. Every jump scattered pieces of you across decades." She kicked a loose panel, sending it skittering into the dark. "And the Dominion, they'll follow the blood trail." A gust of wind howled through the broken chain-link fence, carrying the distant thrum of aircraft engines. Too low for commercial liners, too quiet for the era's clunky drones, Lien's head snapped up. Speak of the devil. She yanked a cracked holopad from her belt, its screen flickering with a storm of incoming data. They're already triangulating. You've got two choices. Run and let them burn this timeline down around you, or come with me and learn how to jump without leaving a trail. The hum in the sky grew louder. Elias met Lien's gaze and saw something unsettling beneath the sharpness. Not just urgency, hunger, the look of someone who'd been waiting for this moment a long, long time. "Lead the way, Doctor," he said. As they vanished into the maze of crumbling warehouses, the first searchlight sliced through the clouds behind them. The first hunter drone sliced through the clouds like a blade, its matte black hull swallowing the moonlight. Then came the rest, a swarm of them, their insectoid silhouettes blotting out the stars as they fanned out over the ruined cityscape. Elias shoved Lien behind a collapsed conveyor belt just as the lead drone scanner painted a crimson grid across the ground where they'd stood seconds before. Sylas brought the hounds. Lien hissed, her fingers digging into Elias's arm. "Temporal signatures, they're keyed to your residual jump energy." Kira was already moving, tossing a scavenged MP grenade into the air. It detonated with a silent burst, sending 3 drones spiraling into the skeletal remains of a refinery tower. Sparks rained down as metal met metal in a shrieking collision. "Won't stop them for long," Jax called, his boots kicking up gravel as he sprinted for cover. "These things learn from every attack." A voice boomed from the lead drone speakers, cold and mechanical. "Rebel fugitives, by order of the Dominion Temporal Integrity Bureau, you are hereby sentenced to erasure." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Then the shooting started. Plasma fire turned the rusted industrial yard into a waking nightmare. Molten metal dripped from collapsing girders as Elias rolled behind a shattered generator, his stolen pistol roaring to life. Every shot felt futile. The drones weaved through gunfire like they'd already calculated every trajectory. Lien yanked a frayed cable from the ground, her hands moving with desperate precision. "They're not just tracking you," she shouted over the din. "They're mapping temporal deviations every step you take, every breath." A drone exploded overhead, showering them with shrapnel. "If they lock onto the pattern, they can backtrack your entire jump history." Elias's comm crackled, Jax's voice tight with pain. "North Alley's clear for now." Kira ejected a spent power cell, her face smeared with soot. "We split up, we die faster. Then we make it count," Elias growled. He tossed Kira the chronocore fragment from his pocket, its edges still glowing faintly. "Take Lien, get to the rendezvous, Jax, and I'll draw them off." Lien's protest died as another drone streaked past, its plasma cannon charging with a high-pitched whine. Elias didn't wait for agreement. He lunged into the open, firing wildly, drawing the swarm's attention like a lightning rod. Somewhere in the chaos, he heard Sylas's voice cut through the drone network, smooth and venomous. "Run all you like, Captain. Time always catches up." The ground exploded at Elias's heels as he ran not away, but toward the heart of the storm. The air shimmered like heat off a desert highway as Elias staggered through the ruined plaza, his boots crunching over broken glass that wasn't there moments ago. The skyline flickered, towers of gleaming alloy dissolving into hollow frames, then vanishing entirely as if swallowed by an invisible tide. A child's laughter echoed from a nearby alley, abruptly severed mid-breath. Lien grabbed Elias's arm, her knuckles white. "Temporal collapse," she breathed. "Every jump we've made, it's not just leaving scars, it's unraveling the threads." Kira's hands trembled over the holodisplay, its projection showing a branching web of crimson fractures spreading through the timeline. The Dominion wasn't lying about erasure, she whispered. A street vendor's cart beside them flickered between existence and memory, its owner mid-sentence when his voice cut to static. Jax kicked a pebble or tried to. His foot passed straight through it. "We're ghosts," he muttered, "or the world is." A monstrous groan split the air as the central transit hub folded in on itself, steel girders twisting like wet paper before disappearing into nothingness. The ground beneath them lurched. Elias's chronometer spun wildly, its digits melting into gibberish. Lien's voice was razor-sharp. "You've seen wormholes tear through ships. This is worse. Every paradox we've created is eating reality from the edges inward." Kira's screen flared with a final warning, a Dominion broadcast crackling through time. "Citizens of Neo-Prog," intoned a voice too calm for the apocalypse it described. "Evacuate immediately. Temporal integrity failure imminent." The image pixelated, showing a skyline Elias recognized their home, their century, before dissolving into noise. Kira's breath hitched. "We're not just escaping," she said, staring at the ruins of a city that had stood for centuries until they'd trespassed here. "We're the disaster." The first scream echoed from the vanishing streets. Then the holo display died, along with the last stable patch of ground beneath their feet. The smell of scorched plastisteel filled the interrogation chamber, sharp, chemical, wrong. Jack spat blood onto the floor, his wrists burning where the restraints seared into his skin with every twitch. The Dominion hadn't just captured him, they'd built this room for him. Sylas stepped out of the shadows, his boots clicking against the alloy floor like a ticking clock. Still fighting, Jack's admirable. He crouched, tilting Jax's chin up with the barrel of a plasma pistol, but pointless. Jax grinned through split lips. "Your speeches got shorter, budget cuts." The pistol's muzzle flared white-hot against his temple. Jax clenched his teeth against the scream. Sylas sighed, thumbing a control panel. The wall behind him shimmered, revealing a live feed of Neo-Prog, not the ruined husk they'd fled, but the city as it was meant to be. Sunlight glinted off the spires. Civilians crowded the markets, oblivious. "Home," Sylas murmured. "Yours if you want it." Jax's pulse roared in his ears. "Bullshit. Direct jump, no erasures. No consequences." Sylas tapped the display, zooming in on a street corner where a woman laughed, tossing coins to a street performer. Recognition hit Jax like a gut punch, his sister alive and whole. "The rebellion fails either way," Sylas continued. "The only variable is whether you die here or walk free." The restraints hissed open. Jax slumped forward, his fingers brushing the edge of the hologram. It felt warm. Sylas dropped a comms unit into his lap. "Call Elias. Tell him you found a way out." Silence stretched between them, thick with the unspoken truth. Sylas didn't need Jax to talk. The Dominion had already cracked his biometrics, his tells. This wasn't interrogation. It was theater. Jax lifted the comm. Static crackled. Somewhere in the wasteland, Elias's voice would be answering, trusting, urgent. The feed flickered. His sister vanished. Sylas smiled. Time to choose rebel. Across the ruined city, Kira's holodisplay lit up with a single, fractured transmission, Jax's coordinates screaming through the static. No voice, no explanation, just a pulse of data too clean, too perfect. Elias reached for his rifle. Kira's hand caught his wrist. "Could be a trap," she whispered. The transmission repeated, louder this time. Elias met her gaze. Or it could be Jax. Outside, the wind howled through the ruins, carrying the distant whine of Dominion dropships. The choice, as always, was no choice at all. The alarms wailed like dying beasts as Elias's boot crashed through the facility's security door. Inside, the air stank of ozone and panic. Dominion scientists scrambled from their consoles, their white coats flapping like surrender flags. Plasma fire lit up the corridor behind them as Jax covered their retreat, his stolen rifle spitting crimson bolts that sent guards diving for cover. Left at the junction. Lien's voice crackled through the comms, her holographic overlay flickering across Elias's retinal display. "Vault's 3 levels down, but they've sealed the lifts. Then we go through the floor." Elias snarled, wrenching open an access panel. Below stretched a maze of coolant pipes and humming power conduits, the facility's guts exposed. Kira didn't hesitate. She dropped into the void, her boots kicking up sparks as she slid down a vertical service ladder. Somewhere above, metal screeched the sound of reinforced bulkheads slamming shut. "They're locking us in," Jax panted, his shoulder bleeding from a glancing plasma burn. Lien's fingers danced across a jury-rigged holopad, sweat beading on her brow. "Not if I lock them out first." The lights flickered as she hijacked the security grid, doors slamming closed behind them in a cascading wave. The vault door loomed ahead, its surface etched with Dominion insignias and pulsing with containment fields. Kira pressed her palm to the biometric scanner. It flashed red. "They've purged the access logs." Lien shouldered her aside, plugging a jagged day to spike into the port beneath. "Old Dominion tech always has a backdoor," she muttered. The spike glowed molten hot as it burned through encryption layers. With a sound like cracking ice, the vault unsealed. Inside, suspended in a stasis field, the stabilizer crystal pulsed, a shard of fractured time itself, its edges refracting light into impossible colors. Elias lunged for it just as the facility's PA system roared to life. "Rebel scum." Sylas's voice dripped with venom. "Did you really think stealing from the future would save your past?" Lien's head snapped up. "Got it," she shouted, yanking the crystal free. The stasis field collapsed with a thunderclap, sending shockwaves rippling through the room. "But we've got company. Sylas is here." The wall behind them vaporized in a storm of particle fire. Through the smoke, black-armored enforcers advanced, their visors glowing the same sickly green as Sylas's temporal blade. Elias hefted the crystal, its weight humming against his palm like a second heartbeat. "New plan," he growled. "We make our own exit." Kira primed her last grenade with a savage grin. About time. The explosion tore through 3 floors of Dominion engineering, and for one glorious moment, gravity itself seemed to hesitate. Then the rebels were falling, not down, but sideways through the bleeding edges of time. The air smelled of burnt circuitry and false victory as Sylas stepped into the ruined atrium, his boots crunching over the debris of his own ambush. His enforcers fanned out behind him, their weapons trained on Elias's battered crew, Lien gripping the stabilizer crystal, Kira with her knife drawn, Jax limp between them, his breathing shallow. "Predictable," Sylas murmured, shaking his head. "Even now, you couldn't leave a man behind." He raised his temporal blade, its edge humming with the same energy that had once torn holes in reality. "That's why you lose." Elias wiped blood from his lip, his shoulders shaking not with exhaustion but laughter. "You always were predictable," he echoed, meeting Sylas's gaze. Then he lifted his wrist, revealing the cracked face of Jax's chronometer, its display not counting down but up. The explosion ripped through the eastern wall first, then the ceiling, then the very ground beneath Sylas's feet. Not an accident, not desperation, a timed sequence rigged the moment they'd breached the facility. Plasma fire erupted as Dominion enforcers scrambled, their formations shattered by collapsing rubble. Kira was already moving, dragging Jax toward the fissure Elias had carved through reality itself, a jagged tear in the air, its edges hissing with unstable energy. Lien hesitated at the threshold, her eyes wide. "This isn't a jump vector, it's a backdoor," Elias finished, shoving her through, "courtesy of your old research logs." Sylas's roar of fury chased them into the void, half drowned by the facility's final collapse. Then the world inverted, not into the clean blue of a controlled jump, but the screaming, kaleidoscopic chaos of a timeline unpicked at the seams. Jax gasped awake mid-fall, his fingers scrabbling at Elias's armor. "You knew," he rasped, "the whole damn time." Elias's grin was a blade in the dark. "Had to sell it." Somewhere in the maelstrom, Sylas's voice crackled over a failing comm link. "You can't outrun consequence." The stabilizer crystal flared in Lien's hands, not a key but a compass. Elias grabbed it, and for the first time they didn't just fall through time, they steered. Lien's fingers tightened around the stabilizer crystal as it cast jagged reflections across her face. "We've been thinking too small," she said, her voice cutting through the static-charged air of the makeshift hideout. The others turned. Elias with his arms crossed, Kira mid-pace, Jax slumped against a crumbling wall. "Every jump we've made has been reactionary, running, hiding." She raised the crystal, its core pulsing like a trapped star. "This isn't just a tool for escape, it's a weapon." Kira's boot crunched on broken glass as she stepped forward. "Say it plainly." "The Dominion's empire is built on one moment," Lien continued, her gaze locked on the flickering holomap of Neoprog's founding. "The ratification vote in 2204. Change that and none of this." She gestured to the wasteland outside. "The distant scream of patrol drones ever happens." Silence. Then Kira's laugh was sharp as a gunshot. "That's not a plan, that's suicide." Her hand slashed through the hologram, scattering light. "We'd be rewriting everything, our own histories, families, hell, the air we're breathing right now." Jax coughed, spat rust-colored phlegm onto the floor. "And if we screw it up, we might not just erase the Dominion, we could erase ourselves." Elias hadn't moved. His eyes tracked the hologram's date markers like targeting reticles. "Lien," just her name, but it carried the weight of a question. She met his stare without flinching. "I've run the calculations. The crystal's energy could punch through to the founding Congress, but we'd need exact coordinates and someone on the inside. A beat, which means one of us stays behind, anchors the jump from this timeline while the others go through." Kira's fist hit the table, scattering tools. "An anchor, that's a death sentence. The temporal backlash would tear them apart atom by atom." Lien finished quietly. "Yes." Wind howled through the shattered windows, carrying the whine of approaching engines. No one had to say it. The Dominion was closing in. Their stolen time was running out. Elias picked up the crystal, his thumb brushing its fractured edge. "How long to prep the jump?" Kira's breath caught. "You can't seriously be considering 7 minutes, Lien said. "If we start now." Outside, the first searchlight speared through the darkness. Elias didn't look away from the crystal. "Then we move." The chrono core roared like a caged animal as the vortex tore open. Not the clean blue rift of a controlled jump, but a jagged wound in reality, its edges hissing with unstable energy. Elias's hands locked around the trembling controls, the ship lurching violently as temporal alarms shrieked through the cockpit. Kira braced against the console, her fingers white-knuckled on the stabilizer crystal. "Coordinates locked for 2110. She shouted over the din, but the holographic display flickered wildly, its projections fracturing into nonsense. Then the gravity failed. The ship spun end over end, hurling them against harnesses as the vortex contorted, its walls pulsing with faces and places that flickered too fast to comprehend. A battlefield littered with Dominion corpses, a skyline swallowed by fire, a child's hand reaching through the chaos. Jax retched, his chronometer's display melting into gibberish. "This isn't a jump," Lien gasped, her voice raw. "It's a free-fall through time." Metal groaned as the ship's hull buckled, a hairline crack splintering the viewscreen. Outside, the vortex convulsed, its currents dragging them toward an event horizon of screaming light. Elias wrestled the controls, veins standing out on his forehead. "We're getting pulled off course. Hold onto something." Kira's console exploded in a shower of sparks. The stabilizer crystal flared blinding white, its energy lashing out like lightning, not guiding them but fighting the vortex itself. For one heart-stopping second, Elias saw it, the coordinates recalibrating on their own, the crystal's glow etching a new path through the storm. Then impact. The ship crashed into existence with a sound like shattering glass, skidding across an unfamiliar landscape. Not the neon sprawl of Neoprog's dawn, but a wasteland of twisted metal under a sky streaked with smoke. The air reeked of ionized fire and something fouler, silence. Then from the ruins a voice echoed, not human, not machine. a chorus of whispers harmonizing in perfect, chilling sync. "You are late, Elias Vex." The stabilizer crystal lay dark in Kira's hands, its glow extinguished. Somewhere in the wreckage, a single word flickered on the ruined console, its letters smeared with ash nowhere. The air tasted like copper and decay, thick with the static hum of Dominion propaganda towers broadcasting their victory hymns across the ruins. Elias staggered to his feet, the wreckage of their ship smoldering behind him, its metal bones twisted into grotesque shapes. This wasn't just another time jump gone wrong. The skyline told the story. Neo-Prog's spires stood pristine, but beneath them, the streets writhed with armored patrols and flickering holo banners of the Supreme Chancellor's face. A child in tatters scrambled past, his eyes darting toward the nearest enforcement drone like a hunted animal. Lien's breath hitched. "This is 2187, she whispered, her fingers tightening around the dead stabilizer crystal. "But it's not ours." Kira spat blood onto the pavement, her gaze locked on a towering monument where the rebellion symbol should have been. Instead, the polished obsidian bore a single engraved date, the day the Dominion crushed all dissent. "They won," she murmured. "No resistance, no us." Jax's laugh was a hollow thing. "Guess we really were the disaster." A holographic newsreel flickered above the square, its audio blaring, celebrating 30 years of unified peace under Dominion rule. The footage showed clean streets, orderly crowds, and then, with chilling swiftness, dissidents vanishing into black vans, their faces pixelated out of existence. Lien's hands shook. No rebels means no one left to disrupt their timeline engineering. They've had decades to cement absolute control. Elias stepped forward, his boot dislodging a cracked datapad. Its screen flared to life, revealing a list of names, people he'd known, allies he'd fought beside, each marked with the same cold notation: erased. A siren wailed in the distance. Too close, Kira grabbed Elias's arm, her voice raw. "We don't belong here." Lien's eyes glittered with something worse than fear, understanding. "That's the point," she said softly. "This is what happens if we fail." The first drone rounded the corner, its scanner painting them crimson. Not a search pattern, a targeting grid. Elias reached for a weapon he didn't have. The world held its breath. The air in the command center was too still, too sterile, a far cry from the smoky war rooms Elias remembered. He moved through the shadows like a phantom, his boots silent against the polished floor. The Dominion insignia glared down from every wall, but it was the figure at the central holodisplay that froze his blood. A younger face, sharper at the edges without the scars of rebellion, clad in the black and gold uniform of a high-ranking officer. Himself, the younger Elias turned, and for a heartbeat their eyes locked across the years. Recognition flickered, not surprise but amusement. "Ah," the officer said, his voice smooth with the arrogance of unbroken victory. The ghost finally shows himself. Elias's hand hovered over his sidearm. He'd faced down armies, temporal paradoxes, the end of worlds, but this, his reflection smirked, tapping the console. The display shifted, showing a timeline branching like shattered glass. "You really thought you could outrun consequence?" His younger self spread his hands, taking in the pristine control room, the obedient officers, the empire built on bones. "Every jump you made fractured history further, and he smirked, "we cleaned up the mess." Outside the panoramic windows, Neo-Prog glittered, no ruins, no resistance. Just order, absolute, suffocating order. Kira's voice crackled in Elias's earpiece, frantic. "Elias, we've got." Static swallowed the rest, but the warning was clear. They were out of time, the officer sighed, adjusting his cufflinks. "Pathetic. You destroyed your own cause before it began." He leaned in, close enough for Elias to smell the expensive cologne, the absence of gunpowder and sweat. "You're just a relic of a dead future." Alarms blared, boots pounded in the corridors. The younger Elias didn't flinch as red lights bathed his face in bloody hues. "Run if you want," he called after Elias's retreating form. "But remember, you built this." The last thing Elias saw before the blast doors sealed was his own smile, cold and triumphant, reflected in the glass. The sewers reeked of rust and desperation, but the faces staring back at Elias burned with something far more dangerous: hope. Kira stood atop a crumbling service conduit, the flickering torchlight carving her silhouette into the damp stone walls. Around her huddled the lost and the hunted, factory workers with Dominion-branded wrists, hackers with neural ports gouged out by enforcement squads, even children who'd never known a sky without surveillance drones. "You think this is peace?" Kira's voice slashed through the murmurs, raw as an open wound. She flung a stolen holodisk into the air, its projection showing the Nexus massacre, thousands vanishing into temporal rifts, erased from history like faulty data. "They call it order, I call it a slow knife." A gaunt woman in mechanic's garb stepped forward, her fingers tracing the scar where a Dominion loyalty chip had been ripped free. "Even if we fight, they own time itself." Lien moved then, cradling the dead stabilizer crystal like a sacred relic. "Not anymore." With a twist of her wrist, the crystal flared, not with light but with sound. A frequency that made the pipes vibrate, the water ripple in perfect concentric circles. The crowd recoiled as their own wrist markings shimmered, the embedded trackers glitching for one glorious second before resuming their silent surveillance. Jax grinned, tossing a brick of stolen C4 from hand to hand. "See that? Their almighty tech's got cracks, and cracks," he hefted the explosive. "That's where revolution's live." Elias felt it before he saw it: the shift in the air, the sharp intake of breath from 100 throats. The moment the fear turned, a teenager with shock white hair lunged onto the conduit beside Kira, his holograph projector humming to life. It displayed a map of the city's temporal relay grid, every node, every weak point. "I can shut down their surveillance for 12 minutes, he panted. "But only if we hit all 12 hubs at once." The mechanic's hands clenched. "That's suicide." Kira jumped down, gripping her shoulders. "So is living like this." She turned to the crowd, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow echoed louder than a scream. "They taught us we were powerless, but we've walked through time. We've seen the futures they steal." Her finger pointed upward through layers of grime and stone to where the Dominion towers stabbed the sky. "Help us tear them down." Silence. Then, like the first pebble before the avalanche, a single hammer struck concrete, the sound of a loyalty bracelet shattering. Another followed. Then a dozen. The white-haired teen whooped, slamming his projector into the map hard enough to send sparks cascading over the crowd. Elias didn't smile, didn't cheer. He simply unslung his rifle and pressed it into the mechanic's shaking hands. Her fingers closed around the grip like it was a lifeline. Above them, the drone's patrol pattern continued, oblivious to the fault line splitting open beneath their master's feet. The ground split open with a sound like cracking bone, swallowing a squad of Dominion enforcers whole before sealing shut, leaving only their screams echoing through the fractured streets. Jax barely rolled clear as a skyscraper flickered in and out of existence above him, its crumbling facade raining glass that dissolved midair, the timelines breaking apart. He bellowed, ducking as a temporal rift yawned where his head had been. Inside the shimmering tear, Elias saw flashes of impossible futures, a city drowned in black vines. A version of Kira with golden Dominion insignias on her armor. Then the vision snapped shut like a hungry mouth. Sylas's voice boomed from every active comms channel. "You wanted to rewrite history. Enjoy the draft." His laughter cut off as a stray plasma bolt struck a relay tower, sending a shockwave through space-time. The air itself seemed to fray, patches of the cityscape unraveling into static, revealing glimpses of other eras like wounds bleeding through. A marketplace from 20 years past materialized around a squad of rebels, their weapons firing uselessly at ghosts. Kira sprinted through the chaos, her boots skidding on pavement that kept shifting between concrete and packed earth. "Lien," she shouted over the roar of collapsing reality. "How do we stop this?" The scientist was already knee-deep in a ruptured data conduit, her fingers wedged into the sparking guts of a Dominion temporal anchor. "We don't," wires hissed as she yanked a glowing module free. "The rifts are feeding on each other. Every change we made, every jump, a building to their left imploded, sucked into a vortex of swirling debris." Jax grabbed Lien's collar, hauling her back as the ground where she'd crouched twisted 90 degrees sideways. Less science, more running. Somewhere above the cacophony, Elias heard it, the high-pitched whine of a stabilizer core charging. Not theirs, not the Dominion's, something older. The sound carved through the battle like a scalpel, so wrong it made his teeth ache. Then the sky tore open. Not a rift this time, a deliberate incision. The stabilizer crystal in Lien's satchel flared white-hot, burning through the fabric as if answering a call. "Oh no," she whispered, her face draining of color. "They're not just fighting us, they're calling reinforcements from every possible timeline." Through the jagged tear in the atmosphere, shadows moved. Dozens of them, hundreds, all wearing the same black and gold armor, all wearing Sylas's face. The console sparked in Lien's hands as she ripped open the access panel, her fingers dancing across circuits that hadn't been touched in decades. The air smelled of burning insulation and something deeper, the ozone tang of time itself unraveling. Around them, the chamber trembled, chunks of the ceiling crashing down as the Dominion's temporal artillery pounded the compound. "It's not gonna hold," Jax shouted, barely audible over the roar of collapsing reality. Lien didn't look up. Her eyes stayed locked on the stabilizer core's flickering readouts, the numbers spiraling into nonsense. "The core needs a manual recalibration," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Someone has to stay, anchor the system while the rest of you jump." Kira's hand closed around her wrist. "Then we all stay, fight our way out after." "No." Lien pried Kira's fingers free, pressing the data spike into her palm instead. "This isn't a fight you can win with bullets. The second that core destabilizes, every timeline we've touched collapses. Billions of people gone, not rewritten, erased." She tapped the spike's activation sequence into the console, the holographic display flaring red with warnings. "But if I sync my biometrics to the anchor point, I can force the system to reset, wipe the Dominion's edits clean." Elias stepped forward, his face half lit by the emergency glow of failing systems. "Lien," she cut him off with a laugh, sharp and bright against the chaos. "Don't look at me like that, Captain. We both knew this war was bigger than us the moment we stole that first chrono core." Her fingers flew over the controls, inputting the final sequence. The console hissed, tendrils of blue energy snaking up her arms like living things. Outside, the walls groaned. Dominion shock troopers breached the inner corridor, their temporal blades humming. Lien met Elias's gaze, her smile softer now. "Some futures are worth dying for." She slammed her palm onto the activation pad. The world tore open around them, not into the familiar blue of a jump portal, but a blinding white void. Elias had one last glimpse of Lien silhouetted against the light, her outline already fading before the vortex swallowed them whole. In the silence that followed, the Dominion troops staggered back as the facility's systems rebooted with a thunderous pulse. The temporal artillery fell silent, the rifts stitching the sky together sealed shut, and in every timeline, in every possible world, Lien Maro's name vanished from the records like she'd never existed at all. The air tasted wrong, familiar yet poisoned. Elias coughed as the jump sickness receded, his boots sinking into the rain-slick pavement of Neo-Prog's eastern docks. The skyline loomed as it always had, Dominion banners flapping from every spire, but the streets teemed with twice as many enforcers, their armor glinting under searchlights that swept the alleys in relentless grids. Kira staggered against a rusted cargo container, her fingers leaving streaks of soot on the metal. "This isn't reset," she hissed. "This is upgraded." A holonews feed crackled to life above the docks, the anchor's voice slick with propaganda. Dominion security reports another successful thwarting of temporal insurgents. The footage showed blurred figures too familiar being gunned down in a back alley. Jax's breath hitched. That's us, that's our last jump. Lien's absence ached like a fresh wound. Without her, the Chrono Core lay dead in Elias's pack, its energy spent. But the Dominion's defenses revitalized, reinforced. Every patrol route they'd exploited before was now locked down, every safe house marked for demolition. Kira's stolen access codes fizzed uselessly in her palm, the encryption rewritten. They knew, she murmured, not just guessed, they knew. Elias clenched his fists, the scar on his palm throbbing where Lien's data spike had burned him during the jump. The Dominion hadn't just survived their assault on the timeline, they'd weaponized it. Every move the rebels made was already etched into enemy strategy, like a game where the opponent could read every play before it happened. A child's laughter echoed from a nearby stack of crates. Elias turned, watching a street urchin scurry past with a handful of stolen ration bars. The boy's wrist bore no loyalty chip. Just a fresh scar where one had been carved out. Jax followed his gaze, then spat onto the docks. So what now? Fight an empire that's already memorized our playbook. Elias studied the searchlight patterns, the gaps between patrols not random but predictable in their precision. A flaw or a taunt, he grinned, blood from a split lip staining his teeth. We changed the game. The holofeed flickered again, this time showing Dominion Chancellor Sylas addressing a crowd, his smile razor thin. They think they've written the ending, Elias said, nodding toward the screen. But stories, he palmed the dead Chrono Core, its surface icy against his skin. They're made to be rewritten. Somewhere in the city, an alarm wailed. The rebels melted into the shadows, not running, not hiding, hunting. Jax wiped blood from his split lip, his grin sharp as a blade in the dim light of the sewer hideout. Remember when I turned traitor? He tossed a cracked holopad onto the makeshift table, its screen flickering with lines of corrupted Dominion code. Turns out Sylas likes to monologue, gave me just enough time to slip something nasty into his network. Kira snatched the pad, her eyes darting across the scrolling data. The glow lit her face in jagged stripes, anger warring with dawning realization. This isn't just a backdoor, it's a worm. One that chews through temporal encryption like wet paper, Jax said, leaning back until his chair creaked. Every jump log, every patrol route, every damn coffee order from their command staff, it's ours now. He tapped his temple. Even better, the virus piggybacks on their own time alerts. The second they detect a rift, we get the data first. Elias stared at the holopad's feed, live Dominion security footage showing enforcers scrambling around an empty warehouse, weapons raised at shadows. They're reacting to ghosts. Jax's smirk deepened. Oldest trick in the book, flood the system with false positives until they stop trusting their own eyes. Outside, thunder rumbled, or maybe artillery. The sound shook dust from the ceiling, mingling with the static hiss of the holofeed. Kira's fingers tightened around the pad. You waited this long to mention it. Had to be sure the virus mutated right. Took a few jumps for it to colonize their entire grid. Jax stretched, wincing as bruised muscles protested. But now, every time they try to track us, the system spits out 100 decoys. A proximity alert blared on the holopad. A patrol diverted 3 blocks west, chasing a thermal signature that didn't exist. Elias exhaled slowly, watching the enforcer's confusion ripple through the network like cracks in glass. Jax tossed him a second data chip. Oh, and I saved the best part. They're temporal relays. Turns out they make beautiful bombs if you ask nicely. The first explosion lit up the feed before Elias could ask how nicely. Somewhere across the city, a Dominion comms tower folded in on itself, its collapse silent on the screen but deafening in the sudden scramble of red alerts. Kira's laugh was a live wire. You arrogant son of a, stick with me, sunshine, Jax said, already typing fresh chaos into the system. We're just getting started. The Dominion headquarters burned scarlet under the emergency lights. its pristine corridors now choked with smoke and the screams of disoriented enforcers. Elias moved like a ghost through the chaos, not running, not hiding, but cutting a precise path through every checkpoint they'd failed to breach last time. Jax's virus pulsed through the security grid, turning automated turrets against their own squads, while Kira's stolen override codes peeled open blast doors like rotten fruit. They found Sylas in the Temporal command center, his hands braced against the central holodisplay as it flickered with 100 collapsing timelines. He didn't turn as they entered. Predictable, he sighed, tapping the screen where a dozen red markers converged on their position. Did you really think hacking our systems would change anything? Kira stepped forward, her boots crushing shattered glass from the ruined observation window. We didn't hack them, she said, tossing a data spike onto the console. It flared to life, projecting a single looping image the moment they'd lost their last assault, every move perfectly choreographed. We wrote the script you've been following. The hologram split, revealing duplicate feeds, Sylas's enforcers chasing shadows in empty warehouses while the real rebels slipped through blind spots. Jax grinned, kicking a spent power cell across the floor. Funny thing about time loops, once you know how they end, you can edit the middle. Sylas's composure cracked. His hand flew to his temporal blade, but Elias was already moving, his stolen shock staff slamming into the weapon's charging port. The blade sparked, its energy feedback searing up Sylas's arm as Elias leaned in. You kept resetting the game, he growled. We just memorized the board. Alarms wailed as the facility's core overloaded, temporal stabilizers misfiring in cascading failures. The rebels didn't stay to watch the collapse. They walked away, not as fugitives, but as architects of a future the Dominion could no longer predict. The last thing Elias heard before the explosion was Kira's laughter, sharp and bright against the roaring flames. The wreckage of the Dominion temporal core glowed faintly in Elias's hands, its fractured surface humming with an eerie, unfamiliar resonance. He'd pried it from the ruins of their last battle, thinking it just another piece of stolen tech until now. The inner casing had cracked open on impact, revealing sigils etched into the crystal latticework. Not Dominion design, not human. Kira crouched beside him, her knife tracing the symbols. These aren't equations, she muttered, they're writing. Jax let out a low whistle as his scanner flickered, struggling to pass the alien glyphs. No wonder their jumps were so precise. This wasn't engineered, it was dug up. A flicker of blue light erupted from the core's heart, coalescing into the holographic bust of Lien, or what remained of her. Her image glitched, voice fragmented like a transmission straining across light years. Elias the Ruins static clawed at her words. The Dominion found it buried under Neoprog's foundations. A ship or a tomb. The hologram spasmed, reforming just long enough to show a cavernous chamber filled with towering obsidian monoliths, their surfaces crawling with the same glyphs. Dominion scientists in hazard suits swarmed the site, their scanners trained on something massive and shadowed at the center. Then Lien's face snapped back, her eyes wild with urgency. Listen, the rift explosions, the timeline collapses. It's not just the Dominion's incompetence. Something is responding, waking up. Her lips moved soundlessly for a heartbeat before the audio crackled back. The device was a key, and they've been turning it in the lock. The projection flickered out, leaving the core dark. Around them, the ruins of the battlefield seemed suddenly smaller, the sky pressing down like a held breath. Jax broke the silence first, kicking a chunk of rubble. So what? We went from fighting time cops to what? Ancient aliens. Elias stared at the dead core, his thumb brushing the glyphs. They pulsed faintly under his touch, warm as living flesh. Then, from the depths of the wreckage, something pulsed back. The ruins of the command center hummed with residual energy, the air thick with ozone and the metallic tang of spilled blood. Elias turned the alien core in his hands, its glyphs pulsing faintly as Kira adjusted the final connections to the Dominion's master temporal array. The machine towered above them, its jagged edges framing a vortex that spiraled into the past, back to the founding vote, the moment the Dominion first grasped time itself like a weapon. Jax wiped grease from his brow, nodding at the display. One push and they never exist, no wars, no camps, just silence. Kira's fingers hovered over the activation sequence, her reflection fractured in the flickering holodisplay. "We'd be saving billions," she murmured, but her voice lacked its usual steel. Elias stared into the vortex, watching ghosts flicker at its edges, not just Dominion enforcers, but faces he recognized. A younger version of himself stealing bread to survive the slums, a sister he'd forgotten, her name erased when the first purges began, and what replaces them? He asked quietly. Another empire, ours. Lien's last hologram had warned them about the device's true purpose. Not just a key, but a test. Jax kicked a shattered console, sending sparks skittering across the floor. "You heard her. This thing wasn't built to edit history. It was built to judge who gets to." Outside, the sky darkened as temporal storms lashed the city, reality itself unraveling from their earlier assaults. A child's cry echoed from the streets below, not in fear, but wonder, as fractured timelines bled together, showing glimpses of worlds without the Dominion. Some were paradises, others worse. Kira's hand faltered. "We could just walk away, let the storms wipe the slate clean." Elias closed his eyes. For a heartbeat, he let himself imagine it, a world where no one had to kneel. Then he reached out and wrenched the core from its housing, the vortex collapsing with a sound like a held breath finally released. "No more playing gods," he said, tossing the device to Jax. "We fight for the future, not the past." The ground shuddered as the array's power surged inward, not outward, not erasing history, but sealing the rifts. The storms stilled, the ghosts faded, and in the silence that followed, the first unscripted dawn in centuries broke over Neo-Prog. The alien core pulsed one last time in Elias's palm before going dark, its eerie glow fading like a dying star. Kira exhaled slowly, her fingers still hovering over the dismantled temporal array's controls. The air smelled of scorched metal and something older, like the silence after a storm. Around them, the ruins of Dominion headquarters lay in jagged disarray, but the sky above was clear for the first time in decades, free of rift scars and propaganda towers. Jax kicked a piece of shattered console, sending it skittering across the floor. "So what now? We just walk away?" His voice was gruff, but his eyes flickered to the horizon, where the first unedited sunrise painted the sky in hues no Dominion algorithm had approved. Elias turned the dead core over in his hands, tracing the alien glyphs one last time. "We don't erase the past," he said quietly. "We don't get that luxury." His thumb brushed a hidden seam in the device's casing, and it split open with a whisper, revealing a hollow chamber filled with swirling silver dust, time itself refined and weaponized. Kira's breath caught, the Dominion's backups, every change they ever made, every edit. All the futures they stole. Elias finished. He tipped the core, letting the dust cascade onto the broken floor, where it shimmered for a heartbeat before dissolving into the cracks. But dust isn't a weapon if you scatter it, it's just history. Jax barked a laugh, crouching to scoop up a handful of the residue. It clung to his fingers like static, flickering with half-formed images. A child hiding a rebel pamphlet, a mechanic sabotaging a patrol drone, 1,000 small acts of defiance the Dominion had tried to prune from existence. He grinned, blowing the dust into the wind. "Let's give the next generation a fighting chance." The breeze carried the particles through the shattered windows, over Neo-Prog spires, into the streets where the first free voices were already rising. Somewhere, a printer whirred to life, spitting out uncensored news sheets. A street musician plucked a band anthem on rewired synth strings. A demolition charge, planted days ago by hands the Dominion had never tracked, finally ticked down to zero. Elias didn't smile. He just watched the dust settle, knowing it would linger in the soil, in the water, in the breath of every citizen who'd spent their life choking on someone else's version of time. The war wasn't over, but it was finally theirs to fight. The ship groaned like a dying beast as the chronocore overloaded, its fractured containment field spitting jagged bolts of temporal energy through the cockpit. Outside the view screen, Dominion battlecruisers tore into each other, gold and black hulls rupturing under friendly fire as their command structure imploded. Elias gripped the controls, his knuckles white against the tremors shaking the vessel. Hold together, he muttered, not to the crew but to the ship itself, this battered relic that had carried them through 100 jumps and twice as many battles. Kira's hands flew across the console, rerouting power from dying systems with the precision of a surgeon. Coordinates are shot, she snapped, the core's too damaged for another targeted jump. Jax leaned over her shoulder, his reflection warped in the flickering holodisplay. So we go blind. A particularly violent tremor sent them lurching sideways. The last functional stabilizer exploded in a shower of sparks, painting the cabin in stark, stuttering light. Elias didn't hesitate. He slammed his palm onto the override, bypassing every safety protocol. Better than staying here, he said, just as the Dominion flagship's particle cannons locked onto their position. The jump portal tore open, not the clean blue rift of a controlled transition, but a screaming maw of distorted light and half-formed images. Cities rose and crumbled in its depths, wars flickered like candle flames, a child's face, half-remembered, reaching toward them before dissolving into static. Kira's breath hitched as the ship lurched forward, the cockpit glass cracking under the strain. Where to now, Captain? Elias watched the Dominion's dying empire vanish behind them, its grandeur reduced to a single spark in the void before winking out. The answer came easily, carried on the same current of recklessness that had kept them alive this long. Somewhere they'll never think to look, then the time stream swallowed them whole. The year was 2200, and the streets of Neo-Prog smelled of ozone and rebellion. A new generation scrawled their defiance across Dominion surveillance drones with stolen plasma cutters, their graffiti echoing words from forgotten histories, time bends but we do not. In a dim-lit bunker beneath the old city, a young woman named Vera traced her fingers over the cracked leather of Elias Vex's journal, its pages brittle with age and smudged with blood. The ink had faded, but the words still burned. They own the past, we steal the future. Around her, the rebel cell hunched over holoscreens, piecing together fragments of corrupted data. A glitching recording showed Elias's face, pixelated but unmistakable, his voice cutting through static. If you're hearing this, we didn't make it, but somewhere out there, the fight's still yours. Vera's grip tightened. The Dominion had erased the old rebellion from official records, scrubbed their names from databases, but whispers lingered in the underground stories of time ghosts who'd slipped through the cracks of history, leaving behind weapons that shouldn't exist and tactics they couldn't have known. One of her lieutenants, a hacker with neural scars from Dominion interrogation, tossed a cracked data spike onto the table, found it buried in the ruins of Sector 12. It's the same encryption Lien Maro used. The spike flickered to life, projecting a map of the city's temporal relay grid, but with new nodes marked in pulsing red. Not Dominion infrastructure, something older, something hidden. Vera stood, her shadow stretching across the peeling propaganda posters of Chancellor Sylas's face. They thought they could bury us by rewriting history, she said, tucking Elias's journal into her coat. Outside, the first hints of dawn leaked through the barricaded windows, painting the room in streaks of gold and rust. But the past doesn't stay dead. A siren wailed in the distance. The cell moved as one, gathering weapons, pulling on masks stamped with a symbol no living artist had designed, a fractured hourglass snatched from the margins of forbidden archives. Vera palmed the data spike, feeling its warmth like a heartbeat. The ghosts were gone, but their war, it had only just begun. The sky burned violet over Neo-Prog as the last remnants of Dominion rule crumbled, not with explosions but silence. The rebels had vanished months ago, their names scrubbed from records, their faces blurred in surveillance footage, until even eyewitness accounts dissolved into contradictory rumors. Yet on every street corner, in every hushed conversation, their legacy pulsed like a second heartbeat beneath the city's skin. A child pressed her palm against a cracked stasis pod in the ruins of Sector 7, fingers tracing the fading outline of a fractured hourglass symbol. The relic hummed faintly, whispering secrets older than the Dominion itself. Across the river, a scholar hunched over forbidden texts, piecing together fragments of a journal that shouldn't exist, entries dated centuries after its author's supposed death. Time, the Dominion had always claimed, was a river to be dammed and diverted. But rivers remember. In the underground printing presses, in the melodies of street musicians, in the way storm drains now bloomed with flowers genetically engineered to resist temporal erosion, the rebels' fingerprints lingered. Not as history, but as possibility, the Dominion's temporal archive showed no record of their final fate, only static, as if reality itself had refused to document their surrender. Some claimed Elias's ship had shattered mid-jump, scattering them across timelines like seeds. Others whispered they'd found the source of the alien core and stepped through. One truth remained: where the rebels had walked, time bent. Not cleanly, not obediently, but in jagged, defiant arcs. A cafe owner in Old Town served spiced cider using a recipe from a cookbook that hadn't been written yet. A mechanic repaired drones with techniques decades ahead of their time, learned from a woman with Kira's laugh, and in the darkest nights when the wind howled through the ruins of Dominion towers, some swore they could still hear the chronocore's hum, not fading but growing. As if somewhere, somehow, the rebels were still running, still fighting, still rewriting the rules. The Dominion had sought to control time. The rebels had taught the universe a simpler truth: time, like freedom, cannot be owned, only lived. And so they lived on, not in monuments or history texts, but in the way a generation raised on propaganda now dared to ask why. In the way a child's chalk drawing of a starburst ship adorned a wall one morning, untouched by enforcement drones. In the way the wind carried the scent of gunpowder and ozone long after the last battle had ended. The rebels vanished, but their war, that was just getting started.